Thanks very much. I'd like to just firstly say how good it is to have the previous speakers on the panel, particularly talking about the situation with disability and the situation generally with the health service, with the public sector, because I don't think anybody would have believed, we didn't, as I think all of us have said, we didn't expect much from a Labour government, and when we were talking earlier and the mics were on, I think we were saying exactly, that most of us didn't actually go and vote for a Labour government, we just couldn't bring ourselves to do it. But I have to say, I didn't think this government would be as bad as how it has turned out. And I didn't think that we would have now, it's almost, they've gone from a green, a supposedly green economic policy to a khaki economic policy, a military policy, which is a permanent war economy, it seems to me, is what the European governments, and Keir Starmer is at the front of these, are really going for. And it's an absolutely hideous thing to think that, and to look at what defence spending means, because what defence spending means is not actually, as people kind of perhaps in the popular imagination think, it's a load of troops who are actually defending people from an invasion or anything like that. That isn't what the money for defence mostly goes on. It mostly goes on weaponry, which costs a huge amount of money, and much of which is either obsolete to begin with, because the Ministry of Defence is the most inefficient government body of them all, and actually its whole record is an absolute scandal in itself. But even if they aren't obsolete at the beginning, they very, very quickly become obsolescent because there are constant attempts to upgrade them. So we have a situation where we have 2 aircraft carriers built really for the prestige of the British Navy and the British Empire, cost 6 billion, the 2 of them, keep breaking down. The government won't tell us the cost of repairing them because it's obviously probably as much as what we're cutting in terms of the benefits for disabled people. We have F-35 fighters which cost £90 million each. We have cruise missiles which, when they are fired, cost £1 million to fire. This is the kind of money that we're talking about. And I was given a figure the other day. Somebody sent me a figure saying the Office for Budget Responsibility, which does these predictions, you can argue about whether they're right or wrong, but this one is pretty horrific. It says that by 2029, in other words, by the end of this Parliament, there will be another £17.3 billion every year spent on so-called defence, on top of the amount that's already spent, which is pretty much the same as the school's budget in this country. That's the priority. This is what they want to do, and this is what they are expecting the people who are the most disabled, the most sick, the poorest people. They expect them to suffer. And there's something really obscene about the idea that we spend money on weapons and missiles and tanks and fighter aircraft, and we know that that money is meaning that people do not have enough food to eat, or do not have the adequate care that they need, or don't have any of those things, and people will be driven to all sorts of despair. That includes, by the way, many people from the armed forces who themselves suffer a very, very heavy level of PTSD and other sorts of mental as well as physical injuries that affect them as a result of their role as soldiers and drone operators, which must be one of the most hideous jobs that you can possibly do. So this is the situation we've got ourselves into with a Labour government, which must be the worst Labour government ever in this country, and there's some competition for that one, but it must be. But we've also got a Labour government which is absolutely deferential to Donald Trump. We've got the tariffs coming, Donald Trump's Day of Liberation. They talk all the time about needing to have this extra money because Russia is supposedly a great threat to Britain, which simply is not true. But the truth is, even if you thought Russia was a threat, does anybody seriously think Donald Trump is less of a threat to world peace than the Russians or the Chinese or anybody else come to that? Any of the other supposed enemies, Iran or any of the other ones. The United States has a bigger military spend than the next 4 countries combined, and that is China, Russia, India, and Saudi Arabia. It has a complete lunatic as its president. It has absolutely hideous policies that are going on in the United States at the moment. And if we're talking about military, Trump is talking about taking over Greenland, which actually is nothing to do with Trump. He's talking about Canada as becoming the 51st state of the United States, which the British government can't be bothered to say anything about, even though the King of England is actually the head of state of Canada as well, but they don't like to mention it because they might offend Trump and he might put tariffs on us anyway, which of course he's going to do in any case. But perhaps the most dangerous thing is that Trump has come out with this line that we've been bankrolling European defence since the Second World War. Well, the only reason they've been doing that, insofar as they have, is because they absolutely want to. And we shouldn't think for a minute that the bases in Germany and Belgium and Italy and Britain are going to disappear as a result of this. But what they are doing is forcing the Europeans to up their game in terms of arms spending. And this is a horrific thing that's going on. 800 billion euros are going to be put for defence across Europe. This is a massive war drive of huge proportions. And it's got I think we have to draw the conclusion that these people, and it includes the governments in Germany, in France, in Britain, they want war. And I'll tell you one example of why they want war. Today, Poland said that it wants to withdraw from the Ottawa Convention on landmines, and already the Baltic states and Finland, and now Poland, have withdrawn from this convention, which prohibits landmines which blow people up, kill farmers who are trying to go about their business after a war and all these kind of things. Why do they want to do that? Because they want to put landmines in all these places in order to have a war with Russia. This is what's going on. So this isn't just an abstract question. It is a question that we are facing now in terms of, when we talk about welfare, not warfare, it's not just simply that there's a long-term threat of war. There is a much, much closer threat of war, and it's getting closer all the time. And when they do this, at the same time as they up this militarism and the nasty nationalism and the scapegoating of refugees, or trying to turn us against the Russians or the Chinese or anybody else who are supposed to be our enemies, what are they doing here? I met with a French MP who was over at the weekend. Everywhere in Europe, the repression on the Palestine movement is growing, and is growing rapidly. That people are being arrested. We know in this country, we know Alex referred to the situation with Chris Nynam and Ben Jamal, who are charged and are going to of breach of the Public Order Act. We know that others of us have been interviewed under caution and have this threat of being charged hung over our heads for an indefinite period of time. We know, and this is perhaps the most shocking, the breaking down of the door of a Quaker meeting house in order to arrest 6 young women who are discussing climate change and war. I mean, if you read that anywhere in a piece of fiction, you would hardly believe that this was possible. I mean, these are the Quakers who've been pacifists for more than 300 years and who, they haven't had state repression like this since the 17th century. And this is what they're facing now. So all of these are very, very serious questions for us. And I think when we talk about what we can do, I think we have to talk about, as people have said, it's an absolutely terrible situation for individuals, a terrible situation for a society which scapegoats is disabled, scapegoats people of different colours, scapegoats people who are refugees, but at the same time boosts militarism and war all the time. It's a terrible thing for society, it's a terrible thing for individuals, but it also contains the basis of people beginning to fight back and to organise. And I think one of the lessons from all the things that we've done, including the demonstration last Wednesday, which we were very pleased to support with Deepak, and I thought it was a very, very impressive demonstration, a very, very spirited demonstration. We are not going to allow them to do this. We're not going to allow the repression. We're not going to allow the scapegoating and the suffering of the people who are losing their benefits. And we're not going to allow them to start another war in Europe, because that will be a catastrophe. And very soon we will have not just the threat of war, there'll be already the talk about conscription I mean, do people seriously want their 18, 20, 22-year-olds to be going to have to fight in a war? And these wars are not the remote wars that they always tell you about. They reckon up to 1 million people have died in Ukraine and Russia. And certainly the level of amputations and serious injuries are very, very high indeed because of the nature of the war. We do not want this to happen again. So it's really, we have to campaign. And I just want to echo, I think it was Paula who said, but somebody said, these things are not popular with, you know, at one level, do we need more defence? People say, yeah, we don't want the Russians invading, you know, this kind of thing can be popular. But when you look beneath the surface, people realise that there's a lot of flag waving, there's a lot of profiteering from the companies, and there's a lot of talk about war, which it's the poor and the working class who really suffer from. So I think we have to, and I think when people see that this is being done at the expense of the disabled and of other people who should be looked after, they're talking now about taxing pensions, they're talking about doing all these kind of things. I think when people see that, this can be an issue where we can seriously begin to win support against this Labour government. And that, to me, is the most important thing. I think that the slogan "welfare, not warfare" is should be the most dominant slogan of our age, of this time, because it is the most important thing, that we want this kind of society and not a society based on militarism and war. I think we have to campaign very, very hard. We're launching the campaign today, Welfare Not Warfare. We're going to have a whole range of activities and meetings and all sorts of demonstrations and protests going on, and we'll be part of the big demonstration on June the 7th, called by the various unions and People's Assembly. And I think for everybody here, we need to get the message from this, how serious it is, but also that we have the ability collectively to organise and to fight back, and that's what we've got to do.
Thanks very much.